For 25 years, I was the silent heir, my voice trapped by a past my father had buried. On my 30th birthday, that past clawed its way out, threatening to burn his empire to ashes. For my 30th birthday, my father rented out the entire top floor of the city's most exclusive skyscraper hotel. It was a glass palace in the clouds, with panoramic views of the glittering metropolis below, a world I owned a piece of but could never truly touch. Hundreds of people were there, a curated guest list of business titans, socialites, and politicians. They all mingled, drank vintage champagne, and pretended to know me, the silent heir to the Montgomery fortune. They would approach, offer a slick smile, and a hearty, "Happy birthday, Alex," and I would simply nod, my own smile a carefully constructed mask. The silence has been my fortress and my prison for 25 years. I wasn't born this way. There are old home videos of a cheerful, chattering toddler, a little boy who loved the sound of his own voice, but at 5 years old the words just stopped. They dried up, leaving a silent, barren landscape inside me. Doctors, therapists, specialists from every corner of the globe were flown in. They poked and prodded, psychoanalyzed and hypnotized. They gave my condition a name, selective mutism. But they could never find the key to unlock my voice. Not for my father, not for the staff, not for anyone. Anyone, that is, except for Alara, my nanny. She's been with me since the day I was born. Now, at 75, her back is a little more stooped and her hair is pure white, but her eyes are still the same, sharp, knowing, and full of a fierce, protective love that has been the only consistent warmth in my life. She is the sole keeper of my voice. In the quiet of my rooms, away from the judging eyes of the world, I speak to her. My voice is rusty, a low whisper, but with her, it exists. She is my dictionary, my diary, my confessor. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the traffic flow like rivers of light far below, when I felt her gentle touch on my arm. "Alexander," she murmured, her voice a soft Irish lilt that has soothed every storm of my life. "Are you all right, love?" I turned to her, the noise of the party fading into a dull roar. The muscles in my throat tightened, the familiar cage closing around my words. But this was Alara. I leaned in close, my lips almost brushing her ear. "I feel like a ghost at my own party," I whispered, the words scraping my throat. She squeezed my arm, her hand, wrinkled and frail, feeling like the only anchor in my storm-tossed life. "I know. But tonight is important. Tonight things have to change." There was a strange glint in her eye, a mixture of sorrow and resolve that I hadn't seen before. It made a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. Before I could ask what she meant, a sudden hush fell over the room. All heads turned towards the small stage at the center of the ballroom. My father, Alistair Montgomery, stood there, microphone in hand. He was a man carved from ambition and steel, with a presence that commanded attention. His smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes, eyes that always looked at me with a flicker of disappointment. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate my son, Alexander, on his 30th birthday." A round of polite applause. 30 years. A milestone. A time for a man to take his place in the world, to find his voice. He paused, and his gaze found me across the room. It was a laser beam, pinning me to the spot. I could feel hundreds of other eyes following his, all focused on me, the broken spectacle. He continued his speech, talking about legacy, responsibility, and the future of Montgomery Industries. It was all a performance. He didn't care about my birthday. He cared about reassuring his investors that the silent heir wasn't a complete liability. He finished by raising his glass. "To Alexander, may the next 30 years be as loud and successful as the first 30 have been quiet." The laughter was scattered but sharp, each chuckle a small dart in my skin. My father then descended from the stage, a path clearing for him as he walked directly toward me. In his hands was a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a watch, its face encrusted with so many diamonds it was hard to read the time. "Happy birthday, son," he said, his voice low enough for only me and Elara to hear. "It's a patek, a man's watch. It's time you started acting like one." He tried to clasp it on my wrist, but I instinctively pulled back. His grip tightened, his fingers digging into my arm. His smile was gone now, replaced by a familiar, barely contained fury. "Don't embarrass me, Alexander, not tonight." Through gritted teeth, he forced the watch onto my wrist. "Now say thank you. Just 2 words. For me. Prove to them you're not a lost cause." The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. The silence was deafening, a crushing weight. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at my father's expectant, demanding face, and my throat felt like it was filled with cement. I opened my mouth, but only air came out, a choked, pathetic sound. His eyes hardened into chips of ice. Just as the humiliation was about to become unbearable, Elara stepped forward, placing herself between me and my father. She looked so small and fragile in front of his towering frame, but her voice, when she spoke, was as clear and strong as a bell. "Stop it, Alistair." My father scoffed. "This is between me and my son, Elara. Know your place." "I know my place perfectly," she retorted, her voice rising, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "My place has been to protect this boy from the truth you've buried. You want him to speak?" She took a deep breath, and her gaze swept across the stunned faces of the guests before landing squarely back on my father. "Then perhaps you should first tell them why he stopped speaking in the first place. Should I tell them, Alistair? Should I tell them what you did to his mother?" The air in the ballroom solidified. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The carefully orchestrated symphony of chatter and clinking crystal died, replaced by a silence more profound and terrifying than my own. My father's face, a moment ago a mask of irritation, became a canvas of pure, white-hot rage. His knuckles were white where he gripped the microphone stand he'd just left. The veins on his neck stood out like cords. "Security," he barked, his voice tight and dangerously low. "Escort this woman out. She's unwell." 2 large men in black suits, who usually blended into the wallpaper, began to move towards us. But Elara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her small frame a rock against the impending tide. Her eyes, fixed on my father, burned with a righteous fire I had never witnessed. "Unwell, am I, Alistair? Or just tired of watching you suffocate the life out of your own son with your lies?" My mind was reeling. His mother. The words echoed in the cavern of my skull. My mother. I have only a handful of faded, dream-like memories of her. The scent of lavender, the soft melody of a lullaby, the feeling of her hand in mine. The official story, the one repeated like a mantra throughout my childhood, was that she had died in a tragic car accident when I was 5. It was shortly after her death that my voice had vanished. Everyone, my father included, had always linked the two. The trauma of her loss, they said, had stolen my words. But Elara's tone, her accusation, it suggested something far darker than a simple accident. As the security guards closed in, something inside me snapped. For 25 years I had been passive, a spectator in my own life. But they were coming for Elara, my protector, my voice. Before I even consciously decided to move, my body was in motion. I stepped in front of her, placing myself between her and the approaching guards. I raised a hand, a silent command to stop. The guards hesitated, looking uncertainly towards my father. They were paid to protect the family, and I was, for all my flaws, the heir. My defiance, a silent act, was more shocking to the room than a shouted obscenity would have been. Alistair's face contorted with fury. "Alexander, step aside, now!" I shook my head. A single, small movement that felt like a tectonic shift. "Don't you dare!" he seethed, taking a step towards me. "After everything I've given you, you choose her?" I looked from my father's enraged face to Elara's steady, determined one, and in that moment I knew there was no choice. There had never been a choice. She was the only one who had ever truly seen me. I turned to her, my back to my father and the hundreds of gaping onlookers. I leaned in and whispered, my voice raw with desperation. "What does he mean? What happened?" "Not here," she whispered back, her hand finding mine and squeezing it tight. "We're leaving." She turned and began to walk, pulling me with her. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea, a sea of whispers, shocked faces, and the unmistakable blue glow of smartphone screens recording our every move. I could feel my father's eyes boring into my back, a wave of pure hatred that was almost a physical force. I didn't look back. With every step away from that glass palace, with every gawking face we passed, I felt a strange and terrifying lightness, as if I was shedding a skin I'd been trapped in for a quarter of a century. We didn't speak in the private elevator. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of unasked questions, of a past that was suddenly, violently, alive. We bypassed the sprawling penthouse I called home and went to the staff quarters, a part of the mansion I hadn't seen in years. Elara's room was small, simple, and clean. It smelled of lavender and old books. It felt more like a home than my own museum-like suite. She sat me down on a small quilt-covered bed and knelt before me, taking both of my hands in hers. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Alexander. I am so, so sorry. I should have told you years ago, but I was afraid. Afraid of him and afraid of what the truth would do to you." "The truth about my mother?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash. She died in the car crash, didn't she?" Elara's face crumpled. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. She reached into the pocket of her simple dress and pulled out something small and metallic. It was an old, ornate silver key. It was tarnished with age and completely unfamiliar to me. "Your mother was the most vibrant soul I ever knew," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She was full of life and laughter and love for you, and she was terrified of your father." She pressed the cold key into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Before she died, she gave this to me. She made me swear to give it to you when you were old enough, when you were strong enough to handle the truth." I stared at the key, a tangible link to a woman I barely knew. "What does it open?" Elara looked me straight in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "It opens a safe deposit box she kept. It contains a letter she wrote to you, and other things. Proof. Your father knows about the box. He spent years trying to find it. He thinks it and its contents were destroyed, along with all her other personal effects." She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if bracing for an impact. "Alexander, everything you've ever been told about the day she died, it was all a lie. My world, which had already felt fragile and disconnected, shattered. The key in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a lead weight pulling me down into a dark, unknown depth. A lie. My entire life, my silence, my grief, it was all built on a foundation of lies. The car crash, the tragic accident. It was a fiction crafted to cover up something else, something my father didn't want me to know." "What lie?" My voice was a thread of sound, barely audible even in the quiet of Elara's room. "Elara, what are you talking about? What happened to her?" Elara's expression was a mixture of grief and steely resolve. "Your mother, Lily. She wasn't just afraid of your father, Alexander. She was planning to leave him. She was going to take you and disappear. She knew he would never let you go willingly. He saw you as his legacy, his heir, not as a child. To him, you were another possession." My mind flashed back to 1,000 small moments. My father's dismissive waves, his lectures on duty and bloodline, the way his approval was always transactional, never given freely. I had always felt like an object, a disappointment he was contractually obligated to maintain. Hearing Elara voice the truth of it made me feel sick. "The day she died," Elara continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "was the day she was going to leave. She had everything packed. A small apartment was waiting for you both, 100 miles away. She was going to start over, give you a normal life, away from all of this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the oppressive wealth and coldness of the mansion around us. "But he found out." A cold dread crept up my spine, colder than any fear I had ever known. "He found out?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "He came home early that afternoon. I was in the nursery with you. I heard them shouting. The shouting was, It was terrible. Your mother's voice, pleading, then defiant. And his was pure rage. I'd never heard anything like it. I locked the door, held you close. You were only 5, but you were trembling. You could feel the anger vibrating through the whole house. She paused, closing her eyes as if replaying a scene she'd spent 25 years trying to forget. Then there was a crash. Not a car crash, Alexander. A different sound. The sound of something heavy falling, of shattering glass. And then silence. A terrible, absolute silence. My own breath hitched in my chest. I could almost hear it, a phantom echo from a buried memory. The silence that came before my own. When I finally got the courage to open the door, your father was standing at the bottom of the grand staircase. Your mother, she choked on a sob. She was lying at his feet. Her neck was at an impossible angle. He just stood there, looking down at her, not with grief, but with cold satisfaction. He told me she'd tripped and fallen down the stairs. A tragic accident. He said it over and over like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. I was frozen, my blood turning to ice. The grand staircase, the centerpiece of our home, a swirling masterpiece of marble and polished mahogany. I had walked up and down it thousands of times, never knowing it was a crime scene, a tomb. The car crash story was invented later, Ilara explained, her voice hardening. It was cleaner, less suspicious. He had the doctors, the police, the coroner, all in his pocket. It was easy for a man like Alistair Montgomery to make the world believe whatever he wanted it to. He created a narrative, and he paid to make it true. The puzzle pieces of my life began to click into place with horrifying clarity. My mutism. It wasn't just grief. I had been in the house. I had heard the fight. Had I seen something? Was my 5-year-old mind so terrified of what I knew, of the monster my father was, that it had sealed my lips to protect me, to keep the secret locked away where he could never find it? My silence wasn't a prison. It had been a shield. He killed her, I whispered. The words felt alien, monstrous on my tongue. Ilara didn't need to confirm it. The truth was screaming in the silence between us. He did it right after he learned you were his sole heir, she said, her voice filled with venom. Your mother's family was old money, older than his. Her will stipulated that her entire fortune, including her controlling shares in a rival tech company, would go to you upon her death, to be managed by a trust until you turned 30. But if you were deemed mentally incompetent, control of that trust would fall to your legal guardian. To him. 30. My 30th birthday. Tonight. The night the trust, my mother's legacy, was supposed to transfer to me. But my father had spent 25 years cultivating the image of me as the broken, silent, incompetent heir. He had never intended for me to take control. My party wasn't a celebration. It was a public display of my inadequacy, the final piece of his long, twisted plan. He needs me to be silent, I said, the realization dawning on me. He needs everyone to believe I can't function on my own. It's all been about the money. Her money. It's always been about the money, Ilara confirmed grimly. And the power. She tightened her grip on my hands. Which is why we have to go. Now. He'll have security looking for us. When he finds out I've told you, I don't know what he'll do. The bank is in the city center. It opens in 7 hours. We need to get there, get what's in that box, and find someone who can't be bought, someone who can help us. Adrenaline surged through me, a powerful current washing away the paralysis of shock. For the first time in my life, I had a purpose that was not defined by my father. I had to uncover the truth, for my mother, for myself. We moved quickly. Ilara grabbed a small pre-packed bag from her closet, and I followed her through a labyrinth of service hallways I never knew existed. We emerged into a cold, pre-dawn alleyway behind the mansion. The air was sharp and clean. For the first time, I was outside the gilded cage without permission, without a driver, without a minder. I was free, and I was terrified. We hailed a taxi, the first I'd ever been in. The city lights blurred past the window as Ilara gave the driver the address of a small, nondescript hotel on the other side of town. The whole time my fingers were curled tightly around the silver key in my pocket. It felt like my mother's hand, reaching out across 25 years to guide me. We checked into the hotel using the cash Ilara had in her bag, under a false name. The room was shabby and smelled of stale cigarettes, but it felt like the safest place on earth. As the sun began to rise, casting a grey light over the unfamiliar city streets, Ilara switched on the small television. The first thing we saw was my face, plastered across every news channel. A photo from the party, looking lost and vacant. The headline read, "Montgomery heir missing, feared abducted by Nanny." Below it, a statement from my father's spokesperson expressed grave concern for my fragile mental state. He was already twisting the narrative, painting me as a victim and Ilara as a kidnapper. He was discrediting us before we even had a chance to speak. Ilara's face went pale. "He's faster than I thought." A knock on the hotel room door made us both jump. It wasn't the tentative rap of housekeeping. It was a hard, authoritative pounding. 3 loud knocks that seemed to shake the flimsy door in its frame. My heart leaped into my throat. They had found us. There was no way. We'd been so careful. Ilara put a finger to her lips, her eyes wide with fear, and crept towards the door to peer through the peephole. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her face was as white as a sheet. "Who is it?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw a terror that dwarfed everything I'd felt so far. It wasn't my father's security. It wasn't the police. "I don't understand," she stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's impossible. He's supposed to be dead." My blood ran cold. "Dead? Who's supposed to be dead?" I moved to the door, my own terror warring with a desperate need to know. Ilara grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't, Alexander. Don't let him see you." The pounding came again, louder this time, more insistent. A voice followed, muffled but clear through the thin wood. "Ilara? Ilara O'Malley, I know you're in there. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. Lily sent me." Lily sent me. The name, my mother's name, hung in the air between us. Ilara's face was a storm of confusion and fear. She looked from the door to me, her mind racing. "It can't be," she whispered, more to herself than to me. Alistair said he was gone. Against Ilara's frantic, silent protests, I moved to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the dingy hallway was a man in his late 50s, with a weathered face, a slight limp, and eyes that held the weary weight of a lifetime of trouble. He looked familiar, a ghost from the periphery of my earliest memories. He was wearing the simple uniform of a city courier, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He was the family's old driver, a man named Marcus, the man who had, according to my father, been driving the car my mother had crashed in, the man who had supposedly died with her. I opened the door. Marcus's tired eyes widened in shock as he saw me. "Alexander. My God. You're—" He seemed at a loss for words. "How are you alive?" Ilara demanded, her voice shaking but laced with its familiar steel. "Alistair's money buys a lot of things, Ilara. Police reports, death certificates, a man's silence," Marcus said, his gaze never leaving me. "He paid me a fortune to disappear, to carry the lie of the accident to my grave. I took it. I was a coward. I had a family to protect, and I was terrified of him. But I never forgot my promise to Lily. He explained that he had been my mother's confidant. He knew she was planning to leave. He was supposed to drive her and me to our new life that day. When he arrived at the mansion, he saw the aftermath. He saw Lily at the bottom of the stairs. Alistair Montgomery, with terrifying calm, had laid out the choice for him. Take a fortune and vanish forever, becoming a ghost in a fabricated car crash. Or his own family would pay the price. Marcus chose to live. "But Lily was smart," Marcus continued, his voice thick with regret. "She had a contingency plan. She told me if anything happened to her, I was to wait. Wait until Alexander was 30. She knew Alistair would try to have you declared incompetent to control her trust. She knew he'd isolate you. She told me to find you on your 30th birthday, to give you this." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "This is the other key, Ilara. The bank requires 2 to open the box." Relief and renewed hope flooded through me. We weren't trapped. We had a path forward. The four of us, me, Alara, Marcus, and the ghost of my mother, were finally united against a common enemy. The next few hours were a blur of calculated action. Marcus, with his knowledge of the city's underbelly, navigated us through back streets and anonymous subways, always one step ahead of the citywide manhunt my father had initiated. We arrived at the bank minutes after it opened, our faces hidden by hats and sunglasses. The vault manager, a stern-looking man who clearly recognized me from the news, hesitated. But the two keys, the authentic identification my mother had left for me in the envelope, and a court order she had preemptively filed 25 years ago granting me access on this specific day, left him no choice. He led us into the cold, sterile vault. The safe deposit box was heavy. Inside, my hands trembled as I lifted out the contents. There was a letter, addressed to me in my mother's elegant handwriting. There was a small, childlike drawing of a stick figure man pushing a stick figure woman down a flight of stairs. My drawing. And there was a microcassette recorder. With shaking hands, I pressed play. The sound of my father's voice filled the silent vault. Younger, but filled with the same venomous rage I'd heard at the party. It was followed by my mother's voice, pleading, arguing, and then a scream, a sickening crash, and silence. My mother had been recording their final argument. She knew. She had been collecting evidence. The last thing on the tape, after a long, terrifying silence, was a tiny, high-pitched voice. My voice. A 5-year-old boy, whispering one word over and over again like a mantra. Daddy? That was the moment. The moment the lock on my own voice, rusted shut for 25 years, finally broke. We didn't go to the police. Marcus knew they were in my father's pocket. Instead, he took us to the one person in the city Alistair Montgomery couldn't buy or intimidate. Julian Croft, a legendary investigative journalist whose career was built on toppling corrupt titans. We sat in his office as he listened to the tape, his expression growing grimmer with every second. He looked at my childhood drawing, at the tear-stained letter from my mother to her adult son whom she would never know. He looked at me, a man who had been silenced by trauma, and he saw the story of a lifetime. Within hours, the dam broke. Croft released the audio recording as part of a live breaking news expose. It was a digital bombshell. The sound of Alistair Montgomery's rage, of my mother's final moments, echoed on every television, every radio, every smartphone in the country. The story of the silent heir who had been protecting a dark secret his entire life was more compelling than any fiction. My drawing was displayed for the world to see. The simple, damning evidence of a child witness. The empire my father had built on lies and intimidation crumbled in a single afternoon. His investors panicked. The board of directors forced his resignation. The district attorney, facing an unprecedented public outcry, had no choice but to reopen the case. Alistair Montgomery was arrested before the sun set. I saw it on the news, saw him being led away in handcuffs. His face, not one of rage, but of utter, complete shock. He had never imagined a world where he could lose. That evening, I stood with Alara and Marcus on the balcony of a hotel suite. A much nicer one this time, paid for with the first funds released from my mother's trust. The city glittered below, the same view as my birthday party, but it looked different now. It wasn't a world I owned. It was a world of possibility. "What will you do now, Alexander?" Alara asked, her hand resting on my arm. I looked out at the endless expanse of lights. For 25 years I had lived without a voice. Now I had so much to say. I had a company to rebuild, a legacy to redefine, my mother's legacy. And I had a life to live, my own life. I turned to Alara, the woman who had been my protector, my confidant, my voice when I had none. I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. And for the first time, without the need to whisper, I spoke to her, my voice clear and steady in the night air. "Everything,"